So I've been trying to work on automated cars. Suppose you have a completely automatic car, no driver. How does it get through the traffic? So let me tell you what happens on the campus of the University of California at Berkeley, near San Francisco, or my campus, the University of California, San Diego, maybe 1,000 kilometers south. But here's what happens. The students get out of class and they take out their phones, make believe this is a phone, and they are walking, and they come to the street and they go. And then when they get to the other side of the street, they do the same thing. They get to the curb and step over it. They never look at the cars. They never look at the signals. They just assume that on a college campus, all the cars will stop. Now, they do. And when the classes change, it's time for this class to end and that class to begin, the students come rushing out. And they keep rushing and rushing and rushing. And I watched a car that was stuck for 5 minutes. It could not get through. Now, what happens in Milan? Well, I saw just this morning green walk light, then a yellow walk light, and then red, but a woman was still crossing the street. And the cars all politely waited for her to cross the street, except for a motorcycle. The motorcycles, he's sitting there and he finally goes, and the woman goes, and crosses the street a little bit faster. The motorcycle was claiming the territory. Claiming territory. The other thing that happened, I watched the cars, they're all waiting for the red light to change to green, and of course they're watching the other light, so they're predicting. And when they think it's getting close, they move up a little bit, right? They get up a little closer and a little closer. Again, they're claiming the territory. And then they go, shoo. Pedestrian behavior often is a herd. If you want to cross a busy street, what's the safest way to do it? Get behind a lot of other people. And so that's a herding behavior. And quite often you'll find somebody who's here, not part of the herd, and they will run up to catch up with the herd, not because they're in a rush, because they want to be part of this big group of people. We call that catch-up or piggybacking behavior. So there's all sorts of behaviors that the cars do, that the pedestrians do. Now, what if you're a fully automatic car and you are carefully programmed not to hit a person? How do you ever cross the street? In Chicago, if you are on the main street and you want to make a right turn, when the green light comes, oops, it's green for you, but it's also green for all the pedestrians. So they cross the street. And so you wait and wait and wait and wait. And finally the light turns red and the pedestrians kind of stop. And you can quickly go through, but just one car for every traffic light signal. So many times the cars force their way through. But what if you're on a roundabout? How do you get out? You have to be aggressive. Or what if there are two lanes that are merging? In the United States, we take turns, this car and that car, this car and that car. I don't know what you do in Italy, but in China or in India, everybody just goes. And in Korea, you have to be really aggressive. What you do is you poke your nose in and a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more, until finally the other car says, okay, you go. So, I'm going to design an automatic car. I'm hired as a designer by a car company. I actually have been. They're paying for our research. How aggressive should we make the car? If it's too aggressive, it's dangerous and also against the law. But if it's not aggressive enough, the car will never get past the pedestrians. Because not only was there a problem with too many people, but pedestrians will take advantage. They'll say, ha, 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 that's an automatic car. I know it will stop. Well, how do you know? If I want to cross the street and there's a car coming that's no driver, how do I know that it's seen me? What does it mean for an automatic car to make eye contact with me? Well, what if there are 15 of me? Yeah, I could flash a light, but how do I know which one of us it's seen? So these are part of the problems that I'm tackling, and these are not your typical problems that we think of in design. So I really like you called my talk Design 21. Yeah, that's what I do, design for the 21st century. So what is design? And what other kinds of problems am I working on? So here's another problem I'm working on. It's in the healthcare system. It's the problem of radiation oncology, which means oncology means cancer, and radiation is these big machines. They're very big, in which you beam ions into the brain in order to kill the tumors. And these are huge machines. They cost about $4 million apiece, and the medical center I'm working with has 5 of them. Now, it's a very difficult process to do this kind of a treatment. It takes many months. It takes months before the patient who complains of a pain and goes to their normal physician, who gets an X-ray, who comes back, who then gets a biopsy, who comes back, who then sends you to an oncologist, a normal cancer specialist, and you come back, who sends you to a radiation oncologist, who then decides to do the treatment, which is very complex. It might take 30 or 40 visits, each one a different day. I counted 12 different medical specialties in treating this one patient. There's a primary care physician, there's a radiologist, there's a person who does a biopsy, there's the oncologist, the radiation oncologist, the medical physicist, the dosimetrist, the therapist, and there's nurses and technical support staff. How do you analyze this? How do you design it? How can you actually make sure it all works? And let me tell you, it doesn't work perfectly today. There are lots of issues that come up during this treatment. The way we analyze these things is we say, well, it's too complex to do all at once. It's a complex system, so we divide it up into little boxes. Here's the box where we do the original diagnosis. Here's the box where we decide it's cancer. Here's the box where we decide upon the therapy, which should be radiation. Here's the box where the radiation oncologist consults with the patient and decides upon the treatment. Here's the box where they do what is called a simulation, in which the person comes in and lies down on the machine and they set it all up and they make sure everything's aligned properly. It can take between 20 minutes and 40 minutes to adjust the machine just perfectly for the patient. And they do this without giving any treatment, just to get everything set up. And then the patient has to come back when they do the real treatment. But meanwhile, the medical physicists and the dosimetrists and the therapists have had to all meet together to review the treatment. They look at the MRIs, they look at the CT scans, they look at everything. So you divide it into all these separate boxes. So you have this box where we do this, and this box where we do that, and this box where we do this. And they spend a lot of time analyzing each of the boxes, making sure that it's all done properly. And then this box is connected to that box by an arrow, which says, okay, you finished with this, we send you here. And this box goes to an arrow. So it's boxes and arrows. Nobody ever analyzes the arrows. What's in the arrows? Well, that's when the person is finished doing this, and now they're going to do that. Okay. How do the people here know what happened there? How do they know the details of the patient? So the arrow is really the communication stream, and it's not obvious how to do that. If you don't give enough information, these people won't really know the true story. If you give too much information, well, the whole purpose of this box was to reduce the amount of information, to say, here's what we think, here's the history, but here's what we think should happen, and here's the treatment we recommend. You don't want this box to have to do it all over again. It's not an easy problem. So far I've only been working on this for a few months. We've had a graduate student spending most of her time in the clinics watching the way this happens. We're talking to the physicians, we're talking to the medical physicists and the radiologists. Well, we call it a wicked problem, and it is. There probably is no solution. There probably is no real solution to the automatic driving. What we can do is make it better. So, what is design? The traditional field of design really started with products. Started a long time ago in England. Wedgwood china, mass-producing Wedgwood china for the middle class who could finally afford something that was, well, designed, that was attractive for their home. And since that time, it has focused primarily upon products. And if you go to most design schools, what you learn, now this is probably more true here at the Domus Academy than of the Polytechnico, because the Polytechnico is an engineering school. But if you go to a straight design school, at least a few years ago, you spent most of your time learning how to draw, you draw straight lines for many weeks, and then you can graduate to squares, and then you can do ovals, and then after you finish all that, that's two-dimensional drawing, you learn three-dimensional, and then you learn about materials, and you learn about construction, you learn about manufacturing, and you end up being a fantastic craftsperson. And you can make the beautiful products that Italy is famous for. Or, I don't know, an Apple computer is famous for. That really are nice to look at. You're excited by them. You want to buy them. You keep them in your home. You display them proudly. But can you understand how to use it? Not necessarily. Who's going to design the interaction between the automatic car and the pedestrians? And the pedestrians and the bicycle riders, especially in Milan, where half the bicycle riders have rented bicycles and they're not very good at riding, and they don't know the city, and they don't know the way the traffic works. Or on the college campus, where they're speeding through as fast as they can go, and the skateboarders, people on skateboards coming fast down the hill, they really can't stop even if they need to. So who's going to design that system? The craftsmanship, the beautiful way we have of drawing and of making things is not very relevant, or the same in the medical process. Now, there is service design. Is designing the interaction of the car with the people service design, or is it interaction design, or is it something else? What about the hospital? That's really procedures. It's not really traditional service design. These are much more complex problems than normal design has approached. So what is design? It's a good question, because I think design is not one thing, and that's the problem. We tend to call it one thing. We say design. I'm a designer, and you know what I do. I make beautiful things. In fact, I really do not like design contests. I've been a judge in many design contests, but in the end, you have hundreds and hundreds of applications, and all you have are beautiful pictures and drawings and some description about why this is the world's best product ever done, written by the person who did the product, of course. You can only tell by what you can see. And I really dislike design museums. Sorry, Paola. Really dislike design museums because, after all, what can they show? They have to show something. And how do you show a behavior? How do you show whether you can really understand this computer or this cell phone or this automatic car which is coming down the street towards me? Will it stop? Many of you may have seen recently on the internet this wonderful YouTube video of a Volvo car. And the owner of the car said, this car automatically stops for pedestrians. And so they proudly stood in front of the car while a person drove the car towards them, and the car ran over them. Didn't stop. And the Volvo said, well, yeah, that car didn't have this system installed. Well, how do you know what features your car has? How do you know what kind of automatic features? And how do you know whether they work? And how do you trust it? What happens if I'm riding down a highway and I see on my left a car coming right towards me on an intersecting road? And just as I see it, my car speeds up. What do? I slam on the brakes. If I have brakes, or I get frightened otherwise. Now, what I don't know is that secretly, My car has talked to that car, and they've agreed that I will speed up and it will slow down, and so they'll just pass safely by each other. And if I don't trust it and I try to change what is happening, I'll make it more dangerous. So how do I communicate that to the driver without driving the driver to distraction? I don't want to tell the driver every single little thing I'm doing. I want it to be more like, say, our stability systems or our anti-lock braking or even our automatic transmission, which does not tell me that it's shifting gears, it just does it. Well, that's okay when you shift gears. What about when you speed up when there's a car coming towards me? Should I need to know that? Well, which ones do I need to know and which ones don't I need to know? Design problem. So these are the kinds of wicked problems that we want to tackle, and we don't have the right tools. Well, the one tool we have is what we call human-centered design. But what is that? So back to what is design? Design is not making a product look pretty, although that's a part of what we do in design. Design is a way of thinking. It's a way of approaching the problems in the world that's actually different from all other disciplines. And for several reasons why. We have a problem in the university which has translated to a problem in our companies, which has translated to a problem in the world, is that in the best universities in the world, we hire people because they're the best professor on that topic. And they get promoted because they're the best professor. And we get letters from other people in the same field to ask, is this really one of the best people? This means, though, the professors have to become really good. That means they become really specialized. They know more and more and more about this little narrow topic, so that we have many, many separate disciplines. And that's all very well if you want to be a professor. But if you want to work in the real world, which is something almost no professor has ever done, look, even professors of business, go to your Polytechnico in the business school. How many of those professors have ever worked in a company? Very few. So they don't know how it works. And in a company, or in any practical domain, you can't be a specialist. You have to be a generalist. You have to know. In design, I have to understand the real needs of people. And second, I have to understand how to translate that into a product. And I have to know whether that's really the right product. So I have to know how to do a rapid prototype and go back and test and see whether it works or not, and then do it again and again and again and again. But I also have to make sure that it can be manufactured and that it meets the cost target of the company and that it won't confuse people, because it may be a brilliant idea, but if it's too soon, it will fail. And people have to buy it. And a lot of this goes against what we teach people. Sony makes a radio, and it has a button on the radio. And the button says, better sound. Actually, it says better bass, but better sound. Why would you have a button that you have to push to make better sound? Why wouldn't you have the better sound all the time? Designers really hate that button. It's not needed. Well, everybody has to have that button because they like to push it once. Just once. You need to push it once and say, oh, it is better sound. And then you never, ever have to touch it again. But unless you knew it was better sound, you might not buy it. So there's an example where a business issue, marketing, impacts to design. There are other issues, too. When I joined Apple, so yeah, I did work in a company. I retired from the university and I went to Apple, eventually was vice president of an advanced technology group. But when I first joined, they were coming out with a new product that I said, wow, that's exciting. It's going to change the world. Well, the product failed. And the Apple tried again, and it failed. And Apple tried a third time, and it failed, and Apple gave up. Was I right or wrong? I was actually right. It's just that I was like 20 years too soon. So what was the product? It was a camera, and it didn't require film. Do you know what film is? You may not even know what film is. film was this funny piece of plastic that came in rolls, and you put it in the camera. And this camera, this digital camera, could only take 8 pictures at a time, but that's okay, because a roll of film could only do 8 pictures. And when you took a picture, you couldn't see what it was. There was no screen on the back, but that's okay. No camera had a screen. The real problem was it was just too soon. The pictures were not of great quality. And then getting it out of the camera into your computer was not easy, and the computer could barely hold all the pictures. And then the whole point was that I could send this to another person at a distance. Well, that meant you had to go to a telephone, and you take off the telephone receiver, and you stick it on these suction cups, and you dial the number, and it gets sent at maybe 300 baud. You don't know what baud means. It's 30 bytes, 30 bytes a second. 30. Not 30,000, not 30 million, 30. It takes forever to send the picture. And we didn't have inkjet printers, so you couldn't print out the nice picture either. So it was just too soon. So what do designers have to know in order to know whether they should do that or not do that? It's not easy. So design is this complex area. And what's wonderful about it, though, is that designers, unlike most people in the university, have to know a bit about everything, or they don't know anything and they're proud of it, and they make things. What designers do is we want to make and do things that change the world. And if it doesn't change the world, it doesn't matter. In the university, most of the fields are analytical. The people study and understand in great depth how this works and what it does, but they don't know how to build things. Well, if you don't know how to build it, what does it do for you? Well, it lets you be promoted as a professor, and you can train graduate students to be professors. But what about in the real world where you want to use that knowledge? Usually the knowledge is not very usable. It's really difficult to use. When a scientist does an experiment, they are looking for tiny little differences, because they're looking for truth. They may have 2 different theories, and they're sort of almost the same, but slightly different. So which one is correct? When a designer does an experiment, the designer wants to know, is this good enough? Did what I do make a difference, a 10 times difference in how people can do things? Because if it isn't really big, who cares? And as for truth, well, if you plot how good something is against all the things I can vary, it kind of goes like this. So notice it isn't very much different across this whole range, which means, this is good enough and that's good enough, so any place in between is good enough. We don't teach that in school. We don't teach how to find out the right value or one that's good enough. We don't teach how to do experiments where you can do it with, instead of a scientist using 100 people or doing a medical trial that can take 4 or 5 years, if we're looking for a huge difference, we can test it on a few people and get the results. Sometimes we can get the results overnight because we're looking for big things. Design is a very different field from any other field. And when you put design into a university, a traditional university, the university doesn't know what to make of it. They say, well, where are your theories? Well, we're developing them. Where is your evidence? Well, this product really sold well. This product, people say, changed their lives. Yes, but where is the statistical significance? And where do you publish? Well, most practitioners in any field, it doesn't matter what the field, whether it's law, dentistry, or medicine, or carpentry or design, most practitioners don't publish. What they do is they say, I built this, and I built that, and I did this. And I was asked by, I don't know, the San Diego Transportation Company to build their trolleys that run in the city. And see all those red trolleys? They're mine. I designed them. Well, where does that fit in the university? Well, the university is supposed to be the place where we generalize knowledge. We learn knowledge that we can transmit to the next generation of students who can therefore do better, learn what happened before and do better. We don't really have much of that in design. We have very little theory and very little evidence-based practices, very little classification. We need more of that. We need to develop ways of getting evidence, not traditional scientific evidence, but at least evidence that allows us to say, yeah, this is better than that. Now, many people say, but that's all subjective. Yes, but there's a whole field in psychology called psychometrics, which is the whole point of that field is to measure with great precision subjective estimates. And there are good methods which we can bring into design. So, one last thing. When designers go to traditional design school, they learn remarkably little about the world. They learn, well, to make things. They're craftspeople. When they go out to do a problem like the healthcare problem, they don't know anything. They don't know about health, they don't know about physics, and they don't know about radiation, they don't know about radiology, they don't know about biopsies, they don't know about how the medical process works. And you know what? As a result, they know they have to learn, so they get all the experts together and they ask them questions, and they ask them stupid questions. And you know what the most powerful question is? It's a stupid question. Because what's a stupid question? Stupid question is one where everybody says, oh, that's obvious. Well, then, but keep going. Why is it obvious? Nobody knows. And when you examine the obvious, you often discover it's not obvious. And if we did things differently, we could make things better. And that's the power of designers, that they are general and they don't know much. So what is design? It's focusing upon the people. It's making sure we solve the right problem, not the one that's given us, but the underlying deep problem. It's treating the whole issue as a system, not as an isolated issue. It's building and testing and changing our minds and going back. It's observing, getting ideas, doing a quick test, going back, rethinking, more observations, another one, until it gets better and better and better. Because we're never going to be perfect, but we can be better and better and better. Design is a way of thinking. It's looking at what goes on inside those arrows. Thank you.
C'è spazio per una domanda? Cerchiamo di
continuare a farsi domande.
Asking questions. Keeping asking questions. Getting surprised every time you bump into a new solution.
Vuole dare la sua frase? No, si stanno nascondendo qui alla mia sinistra. Tu una parola, un pensiero che prenda spunto.
Maybe one word, one idea. I really liked what he said at the very end, that you don't have to believe in what is obvious. You need to understand why this looks obvious, and then you really have to dig down into the depth of the obvious. Okay, storytelling is going on. We will take into account your observations. Don Norman, thank you so much for giving us this incredible lesson.